fourth commandment, depending on which list of the 10 you're reading, says that we are to rest on the seventh day, or to keep the Sabbath. So, when exactly is the Sabbath? That may seem obvious, but from creation throughout the Bible, the days didn't begin and end at midnight like they do on the calendar most people use today. We read the first example of this timekeeping in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 5, and many other times in that chapter. And Yahweh called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So here it seems like a day began at the end of the previous day at sunset. The evening came first, and then the day came after. This is also how Yahweh ordered the Israelites to keep his feasts. In Leviticus chapter 23 verse 32 it says, "It shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest. From evening unto evening you shall celebrate your Sabbath." Evening was the time that the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. We call it sunset. In Deuteronomy chapter 16 verse 6 it says, "But at the place which Yahweh your Elohim shall choose to place his name in, there you shall sacrifice the Passover at evening, at the going down of the sun, at the season that you came forth out of Egypt." So, Sabbath begins at sunset on Friday and ends at sunset on Saturday. This period is the seventh day. So, what do we do on the Sabbath? How do we keep it? Well, the real question is, what don't we do? Well, we don't do work. We don't allow anybody in our house to work. We don't even obligate or allow anybody else, or even an animal, to do any work for us on the Sabbath. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. In it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger that is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Keeping the Sabbath is more than just a chance for us to rest. Setting this day apart also serves as our sign that we're keeping the covenant with Yahweh. In Exodus chapter 31, verses 16 through 17 say, "Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations." This means forever. "For a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." As with any law, if you want to know how serious a crime is, you must consider the punishment attached to its violation. In the case of the Sabbath, which is part of the law as it's one of the 10 commandments, Yahweh assigned a very harsh punishment upon those who would work on that day. We find this in Exodus chapter 31 verse 15. It says, 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to Yahweh. Whosoever does any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. In other words, in the eyes of our Creator, working on the Sabbath is as serious of an offense as murder. As far as work is concerned, there's a never-ending debate over what is and isn't considered work. But one thing we know for sure is off limits on the Sabbath is cooking. We do not cook on Sabbath. we only eat simple foods requiring little to no preparation. Exodus chapter 35 verse 3 says, "You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day." For this reason, the day before any Sabbath is considered a day of preparation. We find a reference of this in Mark chapter 15 and verse 42. "And now, when the evening was come, because it was the preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath." But enough about what we can't do on Sabbath. Something we can do on the Sabbath is good works. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 11 and 12, it says, "And he said unto them, What man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, he will not lay hold upon it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath." As many people in the churches teach against the Sabbath and strive to convince others who haven't studied that Messiah took the Sabbath away, changed it to the first day of the week, Sunday, or otherwise rendered it invalid, an important question to ask would be, did the apostles keep the Sabbath after Messiah? And the answer is, of course, yes, they did. We find an example of this in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 3 through 11. "For we which have believed do enter into rest, as he said, As I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he spake in a certain place of the seventh day, on the wise, and Elohim did rest the seventh day from all his works. And in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest, seeing therefore it remains that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in, because of unbelief. Again, he limits a certain day, saying in David, Today, after so long a time, as it is said, Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. For if Yahshua had given them rest, then would he not afterward have spoken of another day? There remains, therefore, a rest to the people of Yahweh. For he that is entered into his rest, he also has ceased from his own works, as Yahweh did from his. Let us labor, therefore, to enter into that rest, unless any man fall after the same example of unbelief. So in conclusion, our Creator commanded us to abstain from work on the seventh day of every week. This is one of the 10 commandments, and strangely, the only one of the 10 that almost all of the churches reject. But in our Bibles, there was no mention of any change or removal of this commandment. So if you're practicing something else, you should do a little investigating and see who or what you're actually following. Like anything else of controversy, the answer is to read your Bible. See what the Creator said. Do as the Messiah did. Be faithful in the examples of the prophets and the apostles who wrote your Bible, instead of following after men with ear-tickling sermons who would take your money and lead you down a different path.